Hello, I'm Earl Weinberg, and this is Book Circle Presents The Cavalry Cycle. This time we will continue our reading of Bonfire Night. Coy stood behind a frozen smile, racking his brain for a way to save the situation. Right after the little joke about royal jackasses, Dierdre had turned and stared into the swirl of dancers. And among them, conspicuous at 1,000 pounds each, were half a dozen centaurs, each with a girl on his back, and one of them was Vaimont. Her little social laugh died, forgotten. Born of a sundered family, Dierdre had known all her life that centaurs could be real, had heard in due course that Grand Normandy had a cavalry of them, made from men who volunteered to be transformed. It had been one of many curious facts off in the background. One wondered in passing why anyone would do that. Then Rollo had done it. Gossip had passed the news to her. She had not known how to take it. If he had died or married or become a monk or lost a leg, she would have had some idea how to react. Not with this. She had been glad the summer romance was over and had tried not to think about him. Then Coy had made his offer. She had accepted to help her family, and then had learned Rollo would be there. Confusion had reigned in her breast, pushed back as often as possible, but it was possible no longer. Here she was, looking at centaurs live for the first time in her life, and Rollo was one of them, somewhere. She did not see him immediately. Her eye lit on a big red one holding the hands of the girl on his back. Both were smiling, but she did not register that. It was the confusion that struck her. Before, Dierdre had not thought much about centaurs. In the visual arts, the human part was usually an athletic, bare-chested young man, which was agreeable enough. As to the equine part, she was not one of those girls fascinated by horses. Horses were just part of the inventory of the world, expensive, archaic, rather intimidatingly big. Now, harassed by her nerves, her eye could not sort out man and horse combined. Waist was neck. The creature was simultaneously prone and erect. The man's legs were the horse's forelegs, which ought to be like arms, but were still the man's legs. Right here, right now, it made no sense. It was unnatural, monstrous. And there was Rollo. Even as she knew it was an error, a flicker of her mind tried to see him as riding a horse. The flicker failed. He was smiling out of the same bodily confusion. The smiling made it worse. While a part of her mind tried to say it was good he was happy that way, another, less articulate part said dismay was the right reaction to being rendered monstrous. Not being dismayed just made things worse. To be happy, to be that? At least he had not seen her, not yet. There were these few seconds of respite. Coy watched her, saw her gaze lock on Vaimont. Silently, he cursed her and himself. He had never imagined she would react this way. He had imagined her finding the whole thing funny, laughing at Vaimont, teasing him for the big new awkward shape. And in that image, Vaimont was grinning back because that's what Vaimont always did in the presence of a laughing girl. Vaimont would be happy, expansive, easy, eager to please, an easy touch. But she wasn't laughing and wouldn't. And now Vaimont had seen her. Please, Coy growled from behind the smile that was now a grimace, just be nice to him. Suddenly Georgie was in front of them. Mundanes are coming, boss, he gasped and dashed off. See? A satyr, naked and ithyphallic, didn't bother her at all. Why did she have to squick out over Vaimont? Where had Georgie dashed off to? Ah, he was warning the centaurs. Fine. It even gave a few seconds' time while Vaimont slipped on his glamour kerchief. Coy was almost relieved to turn to a familiar problem with a set solution. He spliced the magic flute warning trill into the soundtrack. The boys ran either off into the dark or up to the table to snatch shorts and garlands from underneath. And now here came Weimont, nicely glamoured at least. The glamour didn't help. Dierdre already knew what lay under it. Anyway, she could see under it. An expensive fairy eye ointment applied in infancy had guaranteed that. She saw both reality and illusion and could attend to either, like a person gazing through a telescope with both eyes open. Just now, she barely noticed the glamour and immediately dismissed it. The tables were between them, but he skirted them. Dierdre, he cried cheerily, I'm so happy to see you. Happy. He was happy this way. Please be nice to him. The fragment of him that was still the solid, vigorous body she remembered. Oh, Rollo, she burst out, I'm so sorry. The smile flickered. He looked confused, then smiled again. Sorry? There's nothing to be sorry about. And he came looming up and spread his arms. Much later, she remembered that hugs had been something of a specialty of his. He liked giving them and was good at them. And it had indeed been very pleasant to linger in his embrace in such slight coolness as offered by southern France on a summer night, when you were lightly clad, if at all. But there and then, a monster was going to seize her. She bolted out into the dark. Dierdre! Weimont lunged after her. He got 2 strides into a gallop, only to collide solidly with Donovan's horse shoulder. Dierdre! He yelled again and lunged again, but Donovan blocked him again and grabbed one of the straps on the back of his jacket. Damn it, Bill, Weimont exclaimed, rearing to threaten with forehoof and fist. Donovan pulled sharply down on the jacket strap, checking the rear. What are you going to do? He demanded. Go after her and talk to her. And what'll she do? Donovan asked. How should I know? What did she do when you talked to her just now? She ran away. Do you have anything different to say to her this time? Weimont opened and shut his mouth. Donovan felt the fight go out of him. But what's wrong? Weimont nearly wailed. It's Dierdre. We spent months together in Avignon summer before last. We were lovers. Were you a horse then? Had she ever even seen a centaur that wasn't a picture or a statue? Donovan kept his grip on the jacket strap and led Weimont away from the tables, the fire, and the direction of Dierdre's retreat. Coy noticed was trailing after them. Fletcher said this would be an educational opportunity, Donovan told Weimont, and by Martin's spurs, he was right. The one thing he couldn't teach us in Upham, with centaurs on every street corner, is that we're bloody weird. We're monsters. You're a monster. You freak her out, man. She's scared of you. But I wouldn't hurt her. A grass snake can't hurt you, but thousands of people are scared of him. Don't scare her again. He wheeled to Coy. What do you want? Coy had decided that once more, honesty was the best policy, indeed, the only possible policy. Mr. Weimont, I'm terribly sorry. I arranged for Dierdre to be here for this entire event to make a good setting for asking you a favor. What a waste. What a total waste of effort and money and, above all, time. How much? Growled Donovan. But what about Dierdre? Asked Weimont, and he looked back to the buffet table where he had last seen her. Where's she got to? Is she all right? She'll be fine, Donovan said, hoping he was right. I saw Ben nip after her. Weimont kept on staring with a doubtful expression. He was perfectly justified in that, Donovan reflected, since Ben Darcy was exactly as monstrous as Weimont or himself. But he told himself his foster brother was a clever one. How much? He asked again. Coy squared his shoulders and named a figure. Donovan raised his eyebrows. Pounds or euros? He asked. Coy stared into the dark. Knights, he said. Ben Darcy trotted through the dark. He would have been heartened to know his foster brother's confidence in him, but would have worried about living up to it. He was painfully aware of his dilemma, how to guard someone fleeing a centaur when you were a centaur yourself. Should he call out to her from a distance? And then what? And he was losing sight of her. That brilliant orange coat helped, but it wasn't like it glowed. There was no great danger to Dierdre in just rushing about a pasture in the dark, but as best he could judge, she was headed in the direction of the copse where the Fays held their own revel. He could run ahead of her, if he could keep sight of her, and shout back at her. Then she'd run up to him and Academic now, he had lost sight of her, but he was overtaking another figure, that old satyr, chugging along far slower than a panicky young woman. He formed a plan. Bill's Uncle Evan had told him about running mounts and dismounts. Theoretically, Ben could snatch up the old satyr and swing him onto his back, but neither Ben nor the satyr had any practice at this. The satyr knew nothing of Ben's idea, and he might well be unwilling. So Ben just came thundering up to him. The satyr turned, glanced, and started to veer, but Ben grabbed an upper arm and did his best to keep galloping. No, the satyr shouted. The girl mustn't get lost. I know, Ben shouted back. Can you see her? The satyr, leaping and stumbling from Ben's assist, or capture, pointed with his free hand. Ben followed the course change. In a few seconds, he saw a pale vertical stroke. In a few seconds more, he saw a cluster of dim lights. The girl, and far too close, lights in the fairy copse. On three, he told the satyr, counted down, and released him a few yards ahead of Dierdre. He galloped on. The lights in the copse were like masses of firefly glimmers, too faint to be noticed by humans blinded by a bonfire, beautiful and, right now, fearsome. Ben stumbled to a halt halfway up his forelegs in the bracken at the edge of the copse. He tried to call out over his panting. Re, re, re. He sounded like he was braying. He gave himself over to just breathing for 3 gasps, then managed, return and we return. There was still a lot of wheeze to it. He hoped for the customary keep faith and so do we. Instead, the lemon lime glimmers went out. A cold voice drawled, you are not invited, pony boy. Bad. A light from nowhere unfolded from the dark, a bit greener than the lightning bug flickers, the exact color of cat eyeshine. It illuminated the colonel, as Ben had seen him not long before in Upham Wood, but he was not smiling, and a feline tail switched behind him. I know, sir. Your pardon, sir, Ben gasped, catching up on his panting. It's just, there's a girl lost out there. She might see you, see your lights and come. Not Grand Norman. She means no harm, no disrespect. Please, if she comes, please don't take it ill. She's nothing to do with the pact, said the colonel. We'll do as we choose. You have no say in it. I know. I just beg, sir, please. Another glow opened in the night, and a third. These were a little bluer, paler, the color of the light in a horse's eye. They robed much smaller figures. One was squat in cavalry uniform. Cool off, pussy, said Eowick to the colonel. He's showing manners, so you can too. He's Fletcher's, and I'll not have the peace between us troubled. The other light contained a figure just as short, but much slighter, the squirrel man from the livery stable. Relax, Colt, he told Ben, pointing back toward the hill. She's going back with the horny man. Ben nodded and started to back away. Thank you. My apologies. The colonel gave Eowick a withering look, which bounced off, then rolled his eyes and turned away. Just mind your own business, he said to Ben over his shoulder as he quenched his catlight and vanished. The squirrel groom smiled at him and waved. He and his light faded out. Eowick told him, go back to your own party, Colt. Yes, sir. And he backed further and wheeled to go. He saw the brownie's aureole wink out and the firefly lights blossom again in the trees. He set off at a trembling trot. Was throwing satyrs at a young woman the best way to rescue her? Well, you used what came to hand. He's Fletcher's. Interesting. Fletcher gazed down at Fred and Bob, the unsundered constables, 2 bulky shadows not quite as tall as the sundered Bill Gill. In turn, they thought they were regarding him. They peered up at a point behind his head where the glamour had the human Fletcher apparently riding the horse Fletcher. He had just given them his full name and address in Upham. And you are a teacher at the riding academy there? Asked Fred. He was the one actually in uniform tonight, and maybe he felt he needed to live up to it and be officious. That's right. And you too, sir? He asked Sanders. Oh, yes, right. Sanders glanced down as he spoke, then up again at the column of sparks above the fire. He'd spotted one spark that lingered. Always come over here for bonfire night? No, said Fletcher, maybe 1 year in 3 or 4. And you've never seen these dancers here before? I've never seen them before at all. Have you ever, sir, would you mind dismounting? Fred rubbed the back of his neck. Fletcher sighed and put a weary, decrepit creak into his voice as he said, Lad, you don't know the shenanigans it took to get me up here. Removing me from this horse here. He clapped his equine shoulder, and the image did the same, angles intelligently adjusted. Would be undignified and painful in the extreme, not to mention fatal. There you go, Fred, muttered Bob. Been a while since either of us was called lad. They were in their late 40s. Bill broke in. They've nothing to do with the matter, Fred. A few of these folk come by every year, as you'd know if you ever bothered to come over here on a bonfire night. Fletcher admired the trick by which Bill put the onus on his unsundered colleagues. Well, well, said Fletcher in peacemaking tones, at least there's no indecent exposure going on, though you can see how the rumor got started, with those idiots prancing around in just shorts. I know young people don't feel the cold, again with the elderly creak, but how they can stand it, I don't understand. Another trick to divert the unsundered side with normality against the oddness. What we need to be looking into, offered Bill, is licensing on the beer and wine going down off there. The person you want, put in Delahaye, is Bart Coy. He's their boss. It's his catering service. And what's your connection to him, ma'am? Fred asked. He owes me money. I've only been able to track him down tonight. Ah, Fred found nothing strange here. Any idea why he'd show up here? She shrugged. Maybe he wants to touch one of Professor Fletcher's students for the money he owes me. Some of them must be well off. Fletcher gave her a look which she either ignored or did not see in the dark. It was all well and good to unload the cops on this Coy person, but he didn't appreciate her drawing more attention to his lads. And you are? Fred asked her. Alexandra Delahaye. She gave him a London address and produced a driver's license. That's Coy, she added helpfully, pointing, talking to those 2 young men on horseback. Fletcher saw Coy talking with Donovan and Vimont, the 3 barely visible on the far side of the fire, at the edge of the light. Right, said Fred. Thanks. Come on, Bob, Bill. He started to lead the charge. Oh, and please stick around for a bit, ma'am. No fear. As I said, he owes me money. Once the constables were well away and the irate locals had withdrawn, Sanders cleared his throat and pointed. Sir, there's a spark up there or something, but too big and too dim, and it just hangs about. Fletcher followed Sanders' finger but could pick out nothing. He kept trying, though, and finally saw something flicker and flutter, dithering above them, between them and the fire. He lost it just as it started to descend. Then it was back, about 3 meters above their heads, bobbing about in jinks and jerks, then gone again. There it was again, a moth or even a butterfly, jigging about in a loose hover an arm's length away. On a November night? Sir, Sanders began. Well met by firelight. You are, I think, another creditor, madam? The voice was a light, relaxed tenor coming from the insect. And are these augmented gentlemen your manservants? No, I see they are the servants of the Grand Norman King. With a tiny hesitation that he hoped no one noticed, especially the insect, Fletcher brought up his arm and extended an open palm. The butterfly landed on it, the touch barely perceptible. Quite right, little lord, Fletcher answered. A creditor? Yes, Captain, not as you might think at first drawn to the flame. A wing flickered toward the bonfire. There was a smirk in the voice. Fletcher studied the thing on his palm. Its wings were patched in brown, orange, black, and white, and it wore them like a cloak, standing upright as no natural butterfly ever did. The voice simply came out of the air. There were no moving lips, or any lips, no other motion, all done by magic. Short of eat and breathe, such fays did everything by magic, even think, there being no brain to speak of in such tiny bodies. You didn't meet them often, and then either simple childlike ones or fully mature ones. Fletcher had heard a theory that the sundering kept the middle ranks away from Earth entirely. The babies, larvae, could be unheedingly herded by luck, and the real adults knew better than to buck the system. Maybe, said another theory, it was the adults who kept the troublesome teens away. Yet another theory said they spent their adolescence in other shapes. And the mature ones, doing everything by magic, were all formidable wizards. The wizard in his hand stood about as high as his thumbnail was long. He could make out neither mandibles nor coiled tongue in the dim light, but two multicolored eyes, like opals the size of sesame seeds, glowed in the firelight and stared back at him. Return and we return, Fletcher said hopefully. But the creature, instead of saying, keep faith and so do we, answered, I am not in your pact, Captain, but I appreciate the courtesy. Are you a creditor too? No, I think not, but you have some interest here beyond an evening revel, I believe. I think so. Your debtor, Mr. Coy, is meddling with one of my students, I suspect, perhaps asking him for money to pay off Madame Delahaye here. And you? Oh no, he doesn't owe me money. What does he owe you? Fletcher asked, feeling the answer coming. Himself. Knights, exclaimed Donovan. Did you need to bride a genie king or something? A knight was a widely used unit of magical energy, supposedly the quantity of magic dreamed up in one night by the average human. Donovan's father was a state agent to Darcy's, so it was in the family line that Donovan knew the current exchange rate for a knight was about 200 pounds. Rollo, did you hear how many knights he wants? What? Said Vimont, who had been scanning the dark for Dierdre. Need a loan, Bart. That's fine, but we need to make sure Dierdre's all right. Coy did not even start to get his hopes up. Vimont clearly hadn't been listening. Donovan saw that too and sighed. When Rollo's limited attention wasn't engaged, it was like talking to someone deaf. He quoted the figure again. In knights, he exclaimed, emphasized. Oh, said Vimont. Oh, sorry, old lad. I just don't have that kind of money. Donovan sighed with relief. Military monster he might now be, but he would always be the son of a prudent businessman, and he was relieved to know that Vimont was unable to be that wasteful. But I'd be happy to chip in if that'll help, Vimont volunteered. Donovan watched the desperation in Coy's face. What did he need that much money for? There's no time for chipping in. When do you need it? Donovan asked. 11 tonight. Donovan snorted. That's cutting it mighty fine. Tell me about it. He had been sure he would be able to borrow most of the sum off that diamond charmer in Amsterdam, or that pasha from the Exilate, but they had fallen through, as had one chance after another, until here he was, racing to beg from Vimont, who said he didn't have it. But he had to. Mr. Vimont, please. What do you need it for? Donovan demanded. And we'll find out what he needs it for next time.